Great. And how do you rebuild your microbiome? Like, we have some people taking antibiotics. I personally was on I got bit by a dog and I was on antibiotics
Yep.
for some time.
Yep.
How do you
So
rebuild?
after antibiotics, even single dose antibiotic exposure can take 6 months to a year for the flora to reestablish itself. It happens much more quickly with fasting. In fact, we've done involved in the first study looking at the long-term effects on gut microbiome. That data actually has not been released. Some of the early data from that study has appeared in the Lancet in a preprint article in Lancet preprints, but the actual look at the microbiome is still being processed. It's really complicated because you have 1,000 different strain of organisms. And because most people, 70% of calories come from ultra-processed foods, it's very hard to find people that have a normal flora because they're so screwed up with drugs and the diet. We actually have one of our staff members is somebody who's never had antibiotics, has been on this diet their whole life. It actually is my son. And so we're going to be doing some analysis of his microbiome because it'll be interesting to see. And also some of our staff members that haven't been exposed to drugs or processed foods. We'll see what normal really looks like. But it's actually quite rare. Most people have been treated with inoculations and vaccinations and drugs and antibiotics. And so that what is passed as common isn't necessarily healthy or normal.
And how long can you do an unsupervised home fast safely?
Well, I wouldn't recommend anybody do unsupervised home fasting. If you're going to fast at home, you still use supervision. You have a local doctor and you use one of our doctors remotely to get you through it. And certainly read the book, Can Fasting Save Your Life? And work with your local doctor. But people who are not in a direct medically supervised setting, like the True North Health Center, typically we're not going over 2 weeks. Occasionally we'll go to 3 weeks with the appropriate patients. But everybody should at least make sure you're a good candidate. And you can do that for free. Just go to our website, fill out the registration forms, and talk to me on the phone, and I'll make sure that, if you're not a candidate, we can keep you from getting yourself into trouble. And if you are a candidate, we'll try to get you to somebody that can be useful to you in doing it safely and effectively. What's interesting is a lot of times I'll have people work with their own doctor, and once they see the studies and read the book, they think, okay, well, that's fine. And once they see somebody get well, they're often a convert. A lot of doctors, they've never seen anybody get well before. A lot of our residents come in and say they've never seen anybody with high blood pressure get well. And they see somebody get well and it's like, oh my gosh, they had no idea. I often talk about my uncle, who was a medical doctor, who said that when I told him that people were getting better from high blood pressure, I was in Australia in osteopathic college, and I was treating patients with high blood pressure with fasting at the Arcadia Health Center. And he said, no, they're not getting better. I said, yeah, uncle, they're getting better. I'm taking their blood pressure. He said, well, then you don't know how to take blood pressure because I've been in practice for 50 years and they never get better. And I said, okay, well, I thought I would show him. That's why we did the first study with Colin Campbell on the treating high blood pressure, because we thought we'll show my uncle that he's wrong, that people can get better. And he wouldn't even look at the data. He wouldn't help us at all because he said he wouldn't waste his time until it was published in a peer-reviewed journal. And finally, with Dr. Campbell's help, we got it published in a peer-reviewed journal 2 months before it came out. My uncle died of a massive cardiac arrest. And my mother swears he died just so he wouldn't have to admit he was wrong. I think he died because he liked Kugel, Kreplach, Knishes, and Blintzes, but we'll never really know for sure.
Wow. I don't know if did they write that on the death certificate? That's funny. So one of the things that you said during your talk was cancer needs a high glucose environment. One of the major differences we see during this conference between different doctors is their thoughts on fruit. Brian Clement from Hippocrates says you really shouldn't eat fruit. It feeds cancer. It's not good for you in general because of the high sugar content. What are your thoughts
Well,
on
I think that's a grossly oversimplified view. Now, the truth is, the fruit that we eat today is hybridized, high sugar, low fiber, low mineral content food. But I think for the vast majority of people, a certain percentage of their calories from whole fruit can be health promoting and very useful. There's a problem though. Most calories from fruit is coming from fruit juice and processed, fruit products, not dried fruits and other hyper concentrated food products. They're not necessarily talking about whole fruit. So, apples, bananas, pears, etc. And although there are some people that you have to restrict their whole fruit intake into, diabetics, people that are in active treatment for cancer, whatever, you may need to modify their diet. For most people, we believe that fruit can be an important and healthful part of a whole plant food diet. Now, it's true that we tend to emphasize 2 vegetable-based meals and 1 fruit meal a day. And in that fruit meal, we include lots of greens. So high fiber content material that slows down the rate that the sugar absorbs. But we definitely include whole fruit in the diet of most of our patients. And our diets are about 15 to 18% of calories from fat, because we also include small amounts of raw nuts and seeds, things like flax seeds and walnuts, and also limited amounts of avocado, things of these higher fat foods. So for all but for exceptional patients where we reduce fat below 10% of calories, they're getting 15 to 8% of calories of fat. So they're getting plenty of omega-3 fatty acids. They're getting plenty of essential fatty acids. They're not going to get the dry skin or the other problems that might come from a very, very low fat diet. And they get a variety of foods that make adherence and compliance somewhat easier. I think that's why we're able to get long-term follow-up satisfaction. If you put people on an overly restrictive diet, you're going to have very difficult with adherence. And even though our diet does sound pretty restrictive because it's vegan, SOS free, it's actually in some ways more flexible than some of the restricted diets that are currently being allocated out there. So I don't agree that everybody needs to eliminate all whole fruit, but I do recognize that these high sugar foods can be certainly eaten in excess, and that there are some people that just, like there are some people that don't do well with any food. So you're going to find some people, and that's fine. People don't do well with beans, don't eat them. You can eat more starchy vegetable materials. Most people that can handle a variety of vegetable materials quite well. And so that's where by bulk, that's where the majority of the diet comes from.
So, you mentioned, oil and being, SOS. One of the speakers during the conference is Udo Erasmus, and he talks about how one of the reasons oil is so bad is just the processing, how they kind of destroy it, they denature it and all that. He has a product which is high in omega-3 fatty acid compared to omega-6. It's a
Yep.
sea-based. Are you familiar with it? And what are your thoughts
Yeah.
on that
So
part?
the thing is, oils are oils. Now, there are some oils that are less bad than other oils, okay? And people are going to argue olive oil and different things have different ratios, and I'm not going to argue with that. But the fact is, something being less bad than something else doesn't make it good, and it doesn't make it necessary or advisable. And this diet that I'm advocating, an exclusively whole plant food, SOS-free diet, is a very high omega-3, very low omega-6 fatty acid diet. The ratios go back to being the kind of ratios that we believe are more consistent with optimum health. So we don't need to add processed products in order the diet to shift the balance, because we're stopping, instead of trying to put the fire out with a therapeutic product, let's not start the fire to begin with by keeping people on exclusively whole plant food diets. And I realize that's easy to say and difficult to do because people are caught in the pleasure trap. The whole concept of my first talk with you with the pleasure trap is recognizing that the artificial stimulation of dopamine in the brain that comes from these chemicals that we put in our food, including salt, oil, and sugar, make people addicts. And it's difficult for people to break out of the pleasure trap. And that's why, we wrote the book on the pleasure trap to help people figure out how to do that. And interestingly enough, one of the biggest tools for escaping the pleasure trap is fasting.
Great. Now, how do people go to restaurants? I mean, not that, do they not eat when they go there?
Sure.
Is there things
Yeah,
they
you
need?
go to the restaurants by going to restaurants that have something in the kitchen that's edible. That not all restaurants do. There are some restaurants that have nothing but for example, some of them will have potatoes. You can get steamed or baked potatoes or yams or squash. They might have rice. Maybe it'll have to be white rice because they wouldn't have maybe brown rice. And almost all of them have some kind of vegetables which you can get steamed. The problem is restaurants are designed to deliver oil, salt, and sugar to your palate. And so they're designed to give you what you want, not what you need. They're not there to give you healthy, health-promoting food. They're there to artificially stimulate dopamine production in your brain so that you'll want to eat more, buy more, and leave big tips for the people that service you. So restaurants are basically stocked by professionals at delivering oil, salt, and sugar to your palate using food as a carrier agent. They're not going to serve you boiled beef because you wouldn't like gnawing on boiled beef. So they're going to caramelize it and add salt and sauces and use use the beef as a carrier agent. They're not going to serve you matzah because that's punishment on Passover. They're going to serve you bread, which is matzah that they've added salt, oil, sugar, and yeast to. So they're using the food as a carrier agent. Don't expect them to just serve you food. In fact, I remember one time going into an Asian restaurant and I said, can you give me a big platter of steamed vegetables and plain brown rice? And they said, no. And I said, what do you mean, no? And they said, no, you won't eat. No fat, no flavor. I said, no, I'll eat. And so, I got my steamed vegetables and my rice, and I left the waiter a particularly large tip. And next time I'm in there, sure enough, oh, no, you're in my station. Come over here. And I could hear him in the kitchen. No fat, no flavor, vegetables. Sometimes it's easier to say sauce on the side because then you don't have to have the chef come out worrying that you're not going to be able to choke down the tasteless swill if they don't cover it with sauce. But if you put the sauce on the side, you have plain vegetables with the sauce. So you can even find food at an airport. You just have to think, okay, what raw ingredients do I want? And do they have it? And then can they prepare me something that would be edible? If they actually have a chef and you call ahead, sometimes they'll make you a nice platter of, and you just tell them any starchy vegetables, any steamed vegetables, big bucket of salad, and you'll be perfectly happy. Lemon juice or vinegar, no oils. And, sometimes they'll surprise you. But honestly, it is challenging eating out. Now, on the road, what we always do is we try to pick places that have a kitchenette or at least a microwave. And then you go to these places called grocery stores, and they have stuff that comes in its own package, like banana, peel and eat, oranges, vegetables. You can even get pre-washed salads nowadays at places like Trader Joe's or Whole Foods. And sometimes there's salad bars or things that you can find enough calories to get yourself through. And once you've got yourself normalized with fasting, you realize you can skip a meal or two and you're going to be okay too. You're not going to die because you didn't get some source of calories that one given meal.
And what are your thoughts on things like noodles in a restaurant?
Well, if you get, I'm not a big wheat fan for a lot of people because the gluten in wheat is a big trigger for everything from Hashimoto's thyroiditis to vasculitis and sinusitis, et cetera. But sometimes you can go to an Asian restaurant that might have brown rice noodles or something else that might be less objectionable. Again, ultra processed foods, so they're high on caloric density. You got to portion control it without worrying about weight and stuff. If you eat rice that has 500 calories a pound, rice noodles have 1,500 calories a pound. So it's easier to overeat on them. So if weight loss is a goal, stick to whole foods. If you're trying to gain weight, then sometimes we actually use more of the rice noodles and stuff. With kids, you're trying to put enough food into them so when they go to school and get exposed to that federally subsidized lunch program, they're too full to eat it because you don't want your kids being poisoned by the government.
Now, during a fast, is there any sort of reversal of food sensitivities that a lot of people have nowadays?
Tremendous reduction in sensitivities, not just to food, but also to the environment. So there's so many things that affect your sensitivities, including your gut microbiome, your level of toxicity, et cetera, neuroadaptation to taste. And so oftentimes it is possible to get people that are not able to eat anything hardly without reactivity to be able to start eating whole plant foods. But it doesn't make you so you can eat greasy, fatty, slimy, processed junk and get away with it. It makes it so you can eat whole foods and not be overly reactive or sensitive to it. And some things people can't maybe use every day. They might be able to do if they rotate in their diet once a week and don't overexpose their compromised immune system to it.
And when fasting, is there any recommended type of water, such as distilled, filtered?
So we want highly purified water. We use fractionally steam distilled laboratory grade water, but you could use reverse osmosis or you could use any reliable. It's just you want to get rid of the hydrogen and halocarbons and the awful chlorine and the taste that go along with it because fasting patients are really sensitive. They really like distilled water. Distilled water would be the water you'd get from the atmosphere if the atmosphere wasn't polluted. Rainwater would be an example of distilled water. The problem is the atmosphere is polluted, so you still have to filter even your rainwater. You better run it through a filter and get some of the crap out of it.
And what are your thoughts on probiotics, like the supplements and fermented foods?
So the best way to rebalance the gut microbiome after fasting is with the prebiotic, which is the diet. And that's the big determinant. Taking the probiotic afterwards, there's some evidence that might be some limited clinical benefit for people after antibiotics to use some of the probiotic materials, but it's a minor issue compared to the big issue, which is the environment of the gut itself, which is controlling the diet. And fasting is probably the most profound way of rebooting that entire system.
Right. And you mentioned that type 1 diabetes due to dairy viruses.
Yes.
Is that a proven thing or is that still a theory?
Well, it's well accepted that dairy products are the single biggest variable, and even the American Pediatric Associations don't feed human infants under 2 unprocessed dairy products because there's a known reaction in genetically vulnerable kids. The immune system that reacts to those dairy proteins is what deactivates the islets of Langerhans and the pancreas. The other thing that can do that is there are viral infections that kids can get. So, but if you look at cultures that don't use dairy products, they have dramatically lower type 1 diabetes incidence unless they move here and adopt our diet with the cheese and the coagulated cow pus and all that.
And I know you've done a lot of work with T. Colin Campbell. Does he write about fasting in his books? Do you know?
Yeah, and he's talked about his own. In fact, he wrote the introduction to our new book, Can Fasting Save Your Life? And he told his story and his wife's story, both his story with dioxin poisoning and his wife's story with melanoma. And so, if you look at that introduction, I mean, it's really moving.
This is in the new book coming out, you said?
In our new book that's out, Can Fasting Save Your Life?
All right, perfect.
He wrote the introduction, and he has a brand new book that's coming out shortly that is going to be really disturbing. In fact, I think we're all going to chip in and get him a Kevlar vest because he names names and really goes after the industry.
Yeah, he mentioned that while he was on here, and
he's a courageous hero. We're so fortunate, and he talks about his own experience having discovered dioxin and developing dioxin toxicity, and then fasting with us, and here he is in his 90s, sharp as a tack, and taking no prisoners. So I just really can't tell you how much I admire him and his work.
Yeah, absolutely, same here. And I love the working title, which is going to be the whole truth. So I think that's just so perfect for him.
Yeah.
Now, what other kinds of cancers can be impacted and potentially reversed through fasting?
Well, we have the real cure for cancer. And the real cure for cancer is prevention. And you do prevention with diet, sleep, exercise, and potentially with intermittent and potentially longer term fasting. So we want to prevent cancer before it forms. Once cancer forms, it's about management. So there's no cure for cancer any more than there's a cure for obesity or high blood pressure or diabetes or autoimmune disease. You can manage them. You can keep the weight off if you eat well, but you go back to eating greasy, fatty, slimy, processed foods, you're getting fat again. You're not cured from obesity, you're managed. And you're not being cured from cancer by medical or alternative treatments, you're being managed. If you can get the immune system to keep up as fast as you're forming it, you more or less stay stable. But as soon as the stresses exceed your capacity to compensate, cancer is going to manifest again. And so it's always a balance. And so, an important part is diet, sleep is an important part, exercise, activity, stress also may be an important role. Turns out being under constant inordinate stress isn't a good thing for the immune system. So we teach people that stress is like Christmas. It's better to give than receive. So be generous.
That's funny. Can you improve psychological problems with fasting?
It's interesting. Depression is a very common issue. It's become epidemic. In fact, there's a book out, an excellent book written by an author it's called Anatomy of an Epidemic. And it basically tells the story of serotonin uptake inhibitors, like Prozac that was introduced in 1986. And since then, the likelihood of an acute depressive episode becoming a permanent disability has gone from about 5%, 1 in 20, to about 60% because of how we manage depression with these drugs, which deactivate the D2 receptors in your brain. And as soon as you try to stop taking them, you get acute depression and anxiety, which is great from a pharmaceutical standpoint because now they can tell you have to be on these drugs the rest of your life. But what we do is help people wean off their medications, undergo fasting. And then many times with a healthy diet and lifestyle, they can function better off the medications than they ever did on the medications. And so our goal is trying to help people eliminate the need for the medications with diet and fasting. And of course, we work with Dr. Doug Lisle, who's the co-author of The Pleasure Trap, who's a brilliant behavioral cognitive therapist.